Hello, and welcome to another video. Now, I was originally going to make a response to another video done by Reuters, but something just came up recently that I think is worth discussing. I was scrolling on Instagram and saw a post related to Kamala Harris getting the pick for the Democratic candidate. And the comments were slightly controversial to say the least, and I happened to come across one comment discussing why one young Latino who has American citizenship is going to be voting for Donald Trump. Now, the comments responding to this were undoubtedly very contentious. However, one comment really stuck out to me. I want to say this as polite as possible. I hope some of the replies help sway your opinion. The situation at the border is not great, but it won't be better under Trump. Harris will try long-term solutions and focus on drugs and gangs coming in. Trump will just try to razor wire the border and not let anyone in even for asylum. If it's up to Trump, your family would have never been able to come here for a better life. It's so sad when the Latinos here want to close the door behind them and focus on that because it's what's fed to them. Trump wants mass deportation and ending birthright citizenship, and it's all to fear-monger and gets votes from people like you. There are so many huge issues facing the citizens living here that the border is a distraction from, although yes, it is important. Anyway, hope you have a good day, and thank you for stating your opinion decently without name-calling. Now, just to give a little bit of context, the person who said the reason why he was going to vote for Trump was due to the poor management of the border by the Biden and Harris administration. I don't want to make this into a political video, nor I'm going to tell you to vote for either presidential candidate. However, what I'm going to do is pick this comment apart, piece by piece, to see if any of the points are valid or are rooted in any type of objective thought. So let's go piece by piece and try to break down what this person is trying to convey. He agrees that the situation at the border is very dire and that Trump won't do much to fix it. He also thinks Kamala Harris would do a much better job at fixing it, probably due to her past experience as state attorney, and will work hard to tackle drugs and gangs coming into the country. Well, let's try hard to look at this objectively and not get swayed by anybody else's opinion on the border. Donald Trump was in office for 4 years. Kamala has been vice president for about 3.5 years. So I think it's fair to say that we have enough data to do a comparative analysis on not only policy when it comes to immigration and border security, but the effects of different policies from these two different candidates. Let us start with Donald Trump. In February of 2016, Donald Trump expanded metering at the U.S.-Mexico border. This was started under the Obama administration. What this did was limit the number of asylum seekers allowed to enter the United States each day at ports of entry along the southern border due to actual or perceived lack of asylum request processing capacity. This was upheld by the Biden administration, but it was soon replaced by an electronic metering policy in May of 2023. Metering is one of many tactics used by Custom and Border Protection officers to turn away asylum seekers in the U.S.-Mexico border in a general practice of asylum turnbacks. Under metering, CBP limits the number of individuals who are permitted to access the asylum process each day at ports of entry across the border. Metering was used as early as February 2016, primarily at the San Isidro port of entry. This early usage of metering primarily targeted Haitian asylum seekers, who were required to get a ticket from Mexican officials giving them a place in line to seek asylum at the U.S. border. In 2017, the use of metering declined following a significant drop in the number of people seeking asylum in the first months of the Trump administration. Now, ever since Joe Biden and Kamala Harris took office, they pledged to take a more humane approach to the problems at the border. The administration swiftly found itself dealing with ever-increasing numbers of migrants at the southern border. Democratic-led cities rebelled at the strain migrants were taking on their cities. The administration shifted to a more carrot-and-stick approach that made it harder for people who come to the border to get asylum, while also creating new pathways designed to make the process more orderly. In public comments and on her website, Harris has focused on ways she would enforce border security and crack down on drug smuggling. But when it comes to metering specifically, she has hardly had anything to say about it, or any plans to replace it with something better. In fact, one could make the case that the problems coming from metering at the border have only gotten worse. An article by Human Rights Watch shows how migrants are exploited by criminal groups in Mexico. In the article, it says that the Biden and López Obrador administrations are knowingly exposing migrants to persecution at the hands of cartels that systematically target migrants for kidnapping, extortion, and sexual assault, said Ari Sawyer, U.S. border researcher at Human Rights Watch. The U.S. and Mexican governments should stop forcing migrants to wait in Mexico and should stop collaborating on rights-abusive immigration policies. The report is based on interviews with 128 asylum seekers who were able to share information on the experiences of a total of 263 people, including family members and friends with whom they were traveling, as well as interviews with 13 shelter workers, 8 migrant service providers, Mexican government officials, and human rights workers. Research was conducted in August and September 2023 in Mexico City, Saltillo and Piedras Negras, Coahuila, Monterrey, Nuevo León, Nuevo Laredo, Tamaulipas, and Eagle Pass, Texas. Because U.S. Customs and Border Protection, CBP, does not provide enough appointments through the app to meet the demand from asylum seekers each day, tens of thousands of people seeking asylum have been compelled to wait in Mexico, often for several months since the Biden administration introduced a new asylum rule in May 2023. Now, I believe the blame here goes equally to the Biden administration and to the Trump administration, because Donald Trump was the one who expanded this policy, and the Biden administration upheld it, while simultaneously telling the migrants to surge to the border. Now, moving on to my next point. In November of 2021, the Biden administration then rescinded the Migrant Protection Protocols. This program basically forced asylum seekers to wait in Mexico near certain ports of entry, to where they can wait on their specific asylum case. Now, this policy has been widely criticized for being slow and inefficient. But in my opinion, it was an effective tool for filtering out the migrants who actually had valid asylum cases and those that did not. Because let us not forget, in order to claim asylum, you would have to be facing either political persecution in your own home country or personal persecution. I personally believe that not every single migrant who has come to the United States is fleeing either political or personal persecution. I do, however, believe that they are fleeing poverty, and poverty is not a valid reason to claim asylum in any country. If you are a migrant and if you want to travel to another country to have a better life, that does not make you an asylum seeker. It purely only makes you an economic migrant. And I'm not saying there is anything wrong or bad about it. Just do not be disingenuous and claim asylum, because you are in effect stealing precious time and resources from people who actually do have valid asylum cases. I also think it's safe to say that there are people who have applied for asylum in the U.S. who do not have a valid asylum case, and instead are just using and abusing the system, just so they could come into this country to commit crime. Now we'll come back to this point, as I do have a worrying video to show you later that will back up with what I have to say. But for now, I want to transition to my next point, which is zero-tolerance policy. Under the Trump administration's zero-tolerance policy, the Department of Justice began to criminally prosecute all suspected illegal border crossers for illegal entry, even those who crossed for the first time. Families undergo separations when parents or adult relatives were charged with unlawful entry. This was terminated by the Biden administration in January of 2021. Now, this was probably the most controversial policy that was terminated by the Biden administration, because it did separate families at the border. However, it did persecute immigrants under criminal statutes, rather than simply placing apprehended immigrants in a civil immigration removal proceedings. Under the Immigration and Naturalization Act, people can be prosecuted in the criminal justice system for illegal entry, illegal reentry, or assisting someone in illegal entry. However, past administrations have chosen to simply deport most offenders from the United States rather than use the resources of the criminal justice system to prosecute them. Criminal action has rarely been used in cases of families or parents and children coming across the border. And now, why exactly did this policy separate families in the first place? Well, because the use of criminal charges against parents caught crossing the border triggers a legal situation that necessitates separating children. while the use of civil immigration detention and removal does not require this to occur. When adults are detained and prosecuted in the criminal justice system for immigration offenses, their children cannot, by law, be housed with them in criminal jails, so the family unit is separated. The children are placed with the Department of Health and Human Services in shelters until they can be released to a family member, guardian, or foster family in the United States. Previous administrations used family detention facilities, allowing the whole family to stay together while awaiting their deportation case in immigration court or alternatives to detention, which required families to be tracked but released from custody to await their court date. Some children may have been separated from the adults they entered with. In cases where the family relationship could not be established, child trafficking was suspected, or there were not sufficient family detention facilities available. Both the Obama and Trump administrations have tried to establish more capacity to detain families and children, rather than releasing them until their hearing date. Now, while I admit this is not a perfect solution to people who cross the border illegally, and I will admit that it is a bit cruel to families who come here, it is, however, a good and solid measure for people who come to this country to commit crime, because it actually devotes time and resources to persecuting known criminals, instead of just simply deporting them. And if you think I am just making this up, here is a video to show how an open border with no persecution for criminals affects the people of the United States.
Houses. They're focusing on business owners, local business owners. And these four folks that I'm going to talk to you about for a few minutes, guess how they all got here across the southern border? They're all here illegally. Well, some of them are not here, and I'll explain that. So while you have a group of Asian Americans that came here legally, or their parents did, or running beautiful restaurants, you have this group of folks who have stolen, that we've documented, just about $1.7 million from them in cash, in jewelry, and high-end jewelry, in clothes. And think about this. What makes these folks so really, really dangerous? They are professional burglars. This is organized retail or organized criminal conduct at retail facilities such as our Asian American restaurants. What's interesting about this is they go to the restaurants and they photograph the outside of the restaurant, the inside of the restaurant. They not only photograph the restaurants, they determine who the owners are. They do their due diligence. They search the public record. They identify the owners. They set up surveillance and counter surveillance. They follow these people to their homes. Then they photograph their homes. And they look at their alarm systems. And they look at the cameras in the neighborhood. And they have Wi-Fi jammers and ways to bypass alarm systems. And then once they have their victims patterned, then they attack. They will dress in burqas. They will dress in lawn maintenance equipment, uniforms, like they're there with the lawn service. They will ride scooters through the neighborhoods. They'll be wearing jogging clothes. And once they see that the path is clear, that's when they break in and steal large amounts of items. Here's what we know. This group, we've solved one burglary. Pasco solved one. Pinellas has solved one. Manatee solved one. Hillsborough solved 5. And Collier County has solved 1. That's the $1.7 million in loss. But there are many other burglaries. And in addition to that, these folks came through areas like Kansas and New York, and we suspect when this video and this press conference is released, we'll have law enforcement detectives scratching their heads who are working high-end burglaries, going, my goodness, that's the exact profile of what I'm looking for as well. It's scary when you think about it. Once again, these folks come here and they have successful businesses. And it's reported to us at least one of the businesses has been totally wiped out. In fact, they're not even open any longer. And then we get to the point that I want to make. The key to solving this crime all began with a simple traffic stop by a deputy sheriff assigned to Eagle Lake in Polk County. One of our deputies stopped this car for a traffic violation. We were able to put all four of these people together in the same car. And we made the appropriate charges, but more importantly, that young deputy documented everyone that was in that car on that day. Our detectives, who had been working diligently to solve this because these burglars are very, very good, said, we've got our toe into the door now. So our team set up with FDLE and the Hillsborough Sheriff's Office. We followed these folks, and we followed them from their home in Orange County in two different vehicles. As they came through Polk County, they stopped in Plant City. Guess what they did in Plant City? They started surveilling their next victim. So we watched that, wondering if that's where the hit was going to be. Then they left there and went further into Hillsborough County, into the unincorporated area, and they stopped to change clothes, to get in their burglary clothes. And then they stopped to steal a tag and put it on the vehicle. And then they went to attack the house. Well, because of the incredible work by my detectives, the incredible work by the Hillsborough detectives, the incredible work by the FDLE agents, we were able to arrest them in that burglary. And I'm going to give you the date on that. It was actually on April the 23rd of this year. And I want you to follow that April the 23rd as I go forward. We served subsequent search warrants and we recovered very little property. Very little. We got very little evidence. They are moving their stolen goods out of the area quickly. They use different names. And their goal is they have no fear. And why do they have no fear? Because we don't have a broken immigration system in the United States of America. We have a non-existent immigration system in the United States of America. Now, if you will, go with me for a few minutes. I've got to read this because it's so complex, but I want you to get an idea. Let's start with Geraldine Galano Perez. She's 33. She has a long, violent criminal history in Colombia. She comes to the United States across the Mexican border. She's a catch and release. So she enters on July the 13th, 2021. They catch her and they give her a notice to appear. And guess what? Does she appear? No. So they catch her, they give her a notice to appear, and poof, she's gone. By the way, they'll give you a plane ticket so you can fly to wherever you want to go. And that's at the taxpayer's expense. So on 12/15/22, and then again in 23, the federal judges in New York ordered her removal. On 4/23/24, that's the date we arrested her, we put her in the Hillsborough County Jail under a $32,500 bond. She bonded. She was turned over to ICE. ICE said, now keep in mind, there's an order of deportation in place. We don't have any room for her. There's an order to move her. We don't have any room to hold her. So they release her, and she's bonded. She was supposed to have a state-ordered GPS put on her if she made bond and was released. The federal government said, we don't have any GPSs. So did they hold her and refer her back or get the state to come over and put a GPS on her? Of course not. So we scrambled around, our detectives, when we heard, hey, she's about to be released because we know she is smoke in the air, she's gone. And we get an arrest warrant for her. And we put her in the Polk County Jail. Are you ready? In the Polk County Jail, she's got a $5.6 million bond. And we know exactly where she is. Because, you see, we have a criminal justice system in Polk County. We have a system where we're not going to let these folks torment people in our community. She's got dozens and dozens of charges pending against her. And she is a very, very violent, dangerous person. Where her boyfriend is Milton Sierra. Now listen, follow me for a second. Geraldine and Milton. Doesn't that sound like Hispanic names to you? Just saying. Her boyfriend is 25, so she's a cougar. And he comes across with her, so he's a catch and release, where they give him a notice to appear. And he is remanded to have a GPS at some point in this process. And it's so confusing. Understand, I'm boiling this down. So does he show up for his notice to appear? Of course not. Does he ever get this GPS put on him? If he does, it's removed. He removes it. So once again, on 12/15/22 and then again in 23, the courts, the New York judge, federal judge, orders him deported. So he's arrested on April the 23rd by all of our team for this burglary, where his bond is $32,500. But he is turned over to ICE. They send him to the Chrome Detention Center. They're about to deport him, okay? He's on his way out. So we said, no. We tell the federal government, no, don't deport him. We got some really, really serious charges on him. Help us out. Help another law enforcement agency out. Well, they were more intent on helping the criminal out. Did you hear what I said? I want to make that perfectly clear. ICE was more intent on helping the criminal out. I mean, there's plenty of people for them to choose to deport. They can certainly, right, find somebody else to sit in that seat to deport. So we get with our friends at Kissimmee Police Department who have a stolen property charge out of a pawn shop. They file a case against him. So he goes from Chrome back to the Osceola Sheriff's Office, where he's given another bond. As soon as he makes bond, they send him back to the Chrome Detention Center again. They're now going to deport him. And we're telling them, hey, we got a major investigation underway. Just put him on hold at Chrome. No way. They deport him. He's gone. He's pending all kinds of very serious charges here, and he's gone. Well, some people would say, hey, he's out of the country. He'll be back if he's not already. Now we don't know where he is. He may be in a gated community near you, someplace in the United States, because we know his girlfriend's here and his children's here. I don't suspect he's going to stay in Columbia very long. I don't think he'll want to come back to Polk County because his girlfriend's already shown, hey, if they get a hold of you here, they will keep you locked up the best they can. But did I mention that in the middle of all this, NYPD had arrested him for 2 felonies? And one of them, he had previously cut his GPS. So NYPD has him in custody. He'd already cut a GPS. They had orders on him. Do they grab him there? NYPD is not allowed to talk to ICE. So he's released from NYPD's felonies, and they still have charges pending on him there. Well, Jason Ruiz is 42. He says, we're all friends from our border days. At least that's his statement. On 12/30/21, he comes across the border illegally through Arizona. And he's paroled because there's no space to hold him. Then he receives, or there's one issued, I don't know that he had a forwarding address. Denver ICE does a notice to appear. Someplace in the middle of all this, and we've not been able to nail it down, he's filed for asylum. So we go on, and it's now January of 2024. Kansas Highway Patrol arrests him for DUI, and he bonds. Then he comes to Polk County. We arrest him for no driver's license, and he bonds. We report all of our arrests to ICE. Do they put a hold on him? No. I imagine Kansas reported him to ICE too. Obviously, they didn't hold him because we arrested him. The 4-6 arrest for no driver's license is how we got into this thing. And then, of course, he's arrested when we catch him with our team with the burglary in progress. Now, when we arrest him in Hillsborough County, he's given a $32,500 bond. Okay? And he bonded. He posted it. ICE looks at him and goes, hey, he's here on an asylum status, and they don't hold him when he's turned over to them. So he's out again, free. So we're scrambling around, and we arrest him in Orange County, and we ask Orange County, hey, would you put a GPS on him? Orange County, Florida says, we don't have GPSs. So we have him turned over to us. We run and file some additional charges. He makes bond again with us. We report him to ICE. They won't pick him up because he's on asylum status. We put a GPS on him, which is the most we can do. 2 days later, he cuts it, and he's in the wind. He's gone. Sayonara. I don't know the Spanish version of goodbye, but anyway. Adios. So he's gone. He's in the wind. So this one is in the wind. Compliments of ICE. This one's in the wind. Compliments of ICE. And now we got Geller Cabezas. He's 35. He was never caught. He came across in Arizona from Mexico. He was caught in a Satka home burglary in Michigan on February of 23. He got a whole 170 days in jail for that burglary. And then he was deported to Colombia. So they gave him 170 days. We'll get him out of the country. Sounds like the system worked. He's back. How do we know he's back? because we caught him with his buddies at the traffic stop, and he shows up April 23rd when we arrest him. He has a $32,000 bond. Now, he's charged with aggravated reentry, and he's currently in the Pinellas County Jail on a federal hold. He's already pled guilty to the reentry, and he's waiting for his sentencing in September. Now, what he wants is to get deported. That's his hope. But what he didn't count on was Eric and his team, with all of the investigative resources that we provided the statewide prosecutor, of filing racketeering charges, which is a first-degree felony, subject to 30 years in prison, and conspiracy to RICO. And we've got lots of other charges on the way.
Now bear in mind, because this is the main point I want to drive home for you. But these 4 criminals crossed the border illegally, under the pretense of claiming asylum, then decided to commit burglaries primarily targeting Asian Americans, and were getting away with it for almost 2 years. Meanwhile, the Biden administration and our immigration system just sat idly by and did nothing. And in some cases, one could argue that the Biden administration is enabling this type of criminal behavior with its catch and release program. And this actually transitions well to his second point. Trump will just try to razor wire the border and not let anyone in even for asylum. Well, first off, I don't believe many of the migrants coming in actually have valid asylum cases, because I do believe most of them are economic migrants. But be that as it may, I do believe that the U.S. should allow in people who do have valid asylum cases, since they may very well be fleeing either personal or political persecution. However, that is not up to me or you to decide. It is up to the immigration courts to decide whether somebody actually has a valid asylum case or not. And it has to be done on a case-by-case basis. And it has to follow a legal process and be done in a quick and efficient manner. But that cannot happen because Biden would rather let in almost 500,000 migrants and then give them temporary legal status. And yet, these migrants are completely unvetted. We do not actually know if they have a valid asylum case, because that is up to the courts to decide, not me or you. And on top of all that, we cannot properly vet anyone that comes from Venezuela, because the Maduro regime will not allow us to run background checks on anybody who shows up at the border. In fact, before President Biden took office, there was a policy of extreme vetting that prevented refugees to come from certain Muslim-majority war-torn countries, such as Yemen, Syria, Iran, Iraq, in order to prevent terrorists from coming into the country. This was rescinded by Biden, of course. And what has been the result almost 3.5 years later? Boom! ISIS-K is trying to enter the country illegally through the southern border. Now, luckily, Joe Biden in turn put a temporary ban on individuals from Tajikistan to come in through the southern border. Tajikistan, by the way, is the main place where ISIS-K originates from. But those Tajik people don't have to worry, because the Taliban is currently in control of Afghanistan and will sell fake Afghan passports to virtually anybody who will cough up the money. So those same Tajik individuals can then show their passport at the border and say they are fleeing persecution in Afghanistan. So given all of this, I don't really know where all of this fear-mongering is coming from. Because if anything, these types of events that are happening right now are not supposed to stoke fear in the American people. What it should do is stoke concern and action from the American people. Because just like we as a people and as a society get a vote when it comes to who leads our country, our enemies who hate our democracy and our way of life also get a vote. And they will show up at a time and place of their choosing, unless we as the people act upon it. Never forget, I also want to touch on this small point about Latinos slowly shifting towards Trump. It's so sad when the Latinos here want to close the door behind them and focus on that because it's what's fed to them. How sad? In what way? Not every single Hispanic immigrant story is the same in the United States of America. Anybody that tells you otherwise is either lying to you or is trying to push a certain political agenda. I'll give you some brief examples. Florida has the largest percentage of Cuban Americans in the country, and yet almost all of them have voted overwhelmingly Republican for decades. The state of California has the highest percentage of Mexicans in the U.S., and most of them vote Democrat. New Mexico also has a pretty sizable Latino population, and yet it is a predominantly blue state, with about the highest number of Hispanics running for Congress as Republicans. Now, even though each of these three states have entirely different cultures, demographics, as well as economy and geography, they all boast a significant number of Latinos. And the Latinos who grew up in these three states are shaped by that state's unique political environment. I will say to a certain extent politics does influence culture as well as the makeup of a community, and how that community handles its affairs, does business, and solves its problems. Because that is the biggest unique aspect about America, in that it is a melting pot, not just when it comes to race or creed, but of unique cultural values and ideas. So it comes as no surprise that in the United States, one subset of people may vote differently or have different political views than another subset of people. Now, I personally don't care if Latinos were to shift more Republican or Democrat in the coming decades, so long as they vote for competent leaders that will share and uphold their values, and push for policies that will benefit the communities they are representing. But anyways, this has become a little bit long-winded. Let me move on to the final point of his argument. There are so many huge issues facing the citizens living here that the border is a distraction from, although yes, it is important. Anyway, I hope you have a good day, and thank you for stating your opinion decently without name-calling. Now, I do agree that there are a lot of issues plaguing the United States, but to say that immigration is not an important one, or not as important as the other issues we have in America, is being disingenuous. Because I would make the case that immigration is directly linked to many of the prominent issues we are facing now. I'll give you 3 examples. Let's take housing, for example. Housing is a rising cost in the United States, and it is increasing almost every quarter of every year. But ever since the Great Migration of people into the United States began, housing prices have not only stayed expensive, they have become even more expensive. Adding to this dire situation is the massive influx of illegal immigrants to the U.S. since 2021. According to a Center for Immigration Studies report, the foreign-born population has increased by 6.6 million since 2021, with 58% of this increase coming from illegal immigration. This massive population influx has increased the demand for housing, worsening the existing shortage. Our education system was abysmal compared to many other countries around the world, but the immigration system has somehow made it even worse. In Logansport, Indiana, kids are being pushed out of schools. Immigrant children are just automatically passed in school without developing any type of academic rigor or learning how to speak English, thus lowering standards for literally everybody else's child. Meanwhile, I like to talk about this because we view education as a right in this country, even if that right can be seen as both a positive or a negative right. Now, moving on to crime, before the migrant crisis. Chicago had a pretty small Venezuelan population, but after Chicago started to accept busloads of migrants, crimes done by Venezuelans and against Venezuelans has increased almost 5-fold. The number of Venezuelan-born people arrested by Chicago police this year is up 2,538% compared to 2022, according to data provided by the police department. It's up 11,333% compared to 2021. As of November 12th, CPD arrested 686 people this year who listed Venezuela as their birthplace, according to data provided by the department in response to our Freedom of Information Act request. That compares to 26 for all of last year and just 6 in 2021. Now, let's move on to healthcare. Ever since Governor Abbott started busing thousands of migrants to much of the northern states, it has actually overwhelmed much of the clinics and hospitals in many of the North sanctuary cities, thus leading to overspending and mismanagement. In this video on Facebook, John Barrasso asks U.S. Department of Health and Human Services Secretary Xavier Becerra, why should American taxpayers be forced to pay illegal immigrants' hospital bills?
The crisis at the southern border and how it's overwhelming our healthcare system here in the United States. What we've seen on the news, reported and written and on video and television, hospitals in sanctuary cities right now, New York City, Denver, San Diego, Chicago, Boston, tell us that they're at risk of collapsing financially due to the overwhelming number of illegal migrants flooding their emergency rooms and the clinics who are essentially getting free care, having the American people pay for their care. Clinic in Chicago reported seeing nearly 16,000 migrants last year, illegal immigrants. The cost of their care totals over $30 million. This is what the hospital is reporting, paid for by American taxpayers. Denver Health was in the headlines. In 2023, reported over 20,000 hospital visits from migrants. The hospital is now, not surprisingly, in financial distress. These hospitals are now asking the federal government to bail them out. And it's completely Democrat-caused failure to enforce the law at the southern border. Can you please explain why it is the responsibility of hardworking American taxpayers to foot the bill for all of this care for people, 9 million now, from all across the world who have flooded their way into the United States?
Senator, I appreciate the question. What I can tell you is that we have extended the resources and authorities that we have at HHS to try to be there to help any healthcare facility when there is a way that we can go in to be supportive. I don't know of a particular case that you might want to mention, but I know that we are prepared to be supportive of any facility where the authorities that you have given us allow us to go in and support.
Well, in terms of it's not hard to find stories about hospitals in one sanctuary city after another saying we are overwhelmed with the number of people that we're treating and have no way to recover the costs other than to turn to the American taxpayers. The federal government doesn't pay for the health care of every legal U.S. citizen. It seems like it's in the position now of having to do it for all these illegal immigrants. Why should the American citizens be forced to pay for illegal migrants to receive this same care for free? Because that's what's happening.
Senator, as I said, I don't know how particular states operate their healthcare systems with regard to the folks that are coming in. But what I can tell you is that when we are approached, whether it's through the Medicare program, the Medicaid program, or simply those who are seeking other types of authorities and funds that could help them, we're ready to try to be responsive.
You are aware that when a hospital is inundated with people who are not paying, they have to shift the cost to the people that are paying. And that's what's happening right now.
Thank you for watching my video. Do you agree or disagree with what I had to say? Please let me know in the comment section down below.